crystal that hummed with the thoughts of 1,000 species. Ambassador Shiva of the Vithari stood before the assembled delegates, her crystalline body flickering with colors that showed her distress. She had brought terrible news, and the weight of it made her form dim with fear. 17 systems have gone silent, she said, her voice resonating through the crystal walls. The Krethak swarm has consumed them all. Billions of lives gone. Entire civilizations erased from existence. The chamber erupted in panic. Delegates from across the Galactic Coalition began speaking at once, their various forms of communication, creating a chaos of sound, light, and telepathic noise. The Mindel representative, a floating sphere of pure consciousness wrapped in silver mist, sent waves of terror through the minds of everyone present. The Tauran's ambassador, her water-filled suit sloshing with her agitated movements, clicked and whistled in distress. High Chancellor Vrakon, an ancient being whose species had founded the coalition 10,000 years ago, raised his 6 arms for silence. His deep voice cut through the noise like a blade through water. "Enough," he commanded. "Fear serves no purpose. We must respond with wisdom as we always have." Shiva's colors shifted to dark blue, the Vithari expression of disagreement. "Wisdom? High Chancellor, we have tried wisdom. We sent diplomats to the Krethaks. They were consumed. We sent scholars to study them. They never returned. We sent peace offerings. The swarm ate them and continued forward. Then we must send our defense forces," suggested Commander Thelis of the Astral Guard, one of the few military officers in the chamber. His species, the Korthan, were among the strongest in the coalition, but even he looked uncertain. "The defense forces have already engaged the swarm," Shiva replied, her colors turning gray with sorrow. "The Battle of Karina Reach lasted 6 hours. We lost 400 ships. The Krethaks lost nothing. They simply regenerated, adapted, and continued consuming everything in their path." Silence fell over the chamber. The coalition had not faced real warfare in thousands of years. They had built their civilization on peace, on cooperation, on the absolute rejection of violence. Every aggressive species had been removed from coalition space, isolated or eliminated, to ensure the safety of all peaceful beings. War was something from the ancient past, a nightmare they thought they had left behind forever. "What do they want?" asked the Mindel representative, his telepathic voice trembling in everyone's minds. "There must be something they desire. We can negotiate, find common ground." Shiva's form flickered with frustration. "They want to consume. That is all. The Krethaks are a hive mind, a parasitic collective that feeds on biological matter and grows with every world they take. They do not communicate. They do not negotiate. They simply spread like a disease across the galaxy." "Then we must evacuate," someone suggested. "Move our populations away from the swarm's path." "To where?" Shiva demanded. "The projections show the swarm will consume the entire coalition within 5 years. There is nowhere to run. We need to fight, but we do not remember how. We have no warriors. We have no weapons capable of stopping them." The chamber fell into despair. Delegates began arguing about evacuation plans, about which systems to abandon first, about how to preserve their cultures if everything fell. No one spoke of victory because no one believed it was possible. Shiva returned to her private chamber after the council session, her crystalline form pulsing with exhausted light. She had not told the council everything. She had one more piece of information, something she had discovered in the deep archives while searching desperately for any solution to the Krethaks' threat. She accessed the ancient database, diving through layers of historical records that went back to the coalition's founding. Most species never looked at these old files. The past was the past, and the coalition preferred to look forward. But Shiva had been thorough in her research, and she had found something strange. The file was marked with warning symbols in a dozen languages. Quarantine zone. Dangerous species do not approach. Lethal force authorized. Inside the file was information about a small star system on the edge of coalition space. A yellow star with 8 planets, one of them covered in water and teeming with life. The species that lived there were called humans, and they had been sealed away from the galaxy for over 300 years. Shiva read through the incident reports, her color shifting with each new piece of information. The humans had achieved faster-than-light travel and immediately set out to explore the galaxy. Their first contact with coalition species had been peaceful at first, but then something had gone wrong. A human exploration ship had found a Coalition colony under attack by space pirates, a rare criminal element that the Coalition had struggled to handle peacefully. The humans had not hesitated. They had destroyed the pirate ships with weapons the Coalition had never seen, weapons designed specifically to kill. Then they had landed on the colony and fought the remaining pirates in brutal close combat, saving thousands of Coalition civilians. The Coalition had been grateful, but also terrified. The humans were efficient killers and they did not seem troubled by violence. When questioned, the human captain had simply said, "They were hurting innocent people. We stopped them. What else were we supposed to do?" The Coalition had debated for months about what to do with humanity. These beings had saved Coalition lives, but they were also clearly dangerous. They had militaries, weapons, and a culture that accepted warfare as normal. Eventually, the decision was made to quarantine the Sol system, to seal humanity away from the galaxy for everyone's safety. The humans had protested. They had argued that they were not monsters, that they only used violence to protect the innocent. But the Coalition had been firm. Humanity was too dangerous to be allowed into peaceful galactic society. A barrier was constructed around their star system, and they were left alone, isolated from the rest of the galaxy. That had been 300 years ago. The file contained no information about what had happened to humanity since then. Were they still alive? Had they destroyed themselves in their violent nature? Or had they built something within their prison? Shiva knew what she had to do. She also knew the Council would never approve it. But she was out of options and her people were dying. She gathered a small team of volunteers, beings desperate enough to try anything. There was Mindel 7, a young consciousness who had lost his entire family to the Krithax. There was Torin's Captain Mala, who wanted revenge for her destroyed homeworld. And there was Korthan Lieutenant Vex, one of the few Coalition officers who still remembered how to think about combat. "I am asking you to come with me on a mission that will likely result in our execution if we return," Shiva told them honestly. "We are going to the quarantine zone. We are going to ask humanity for help." The reaction was mixed. Vex looked intrigued. Mala looked desperate enough to try anything. Mindel 7's thoughts radiated pure determination. "The humans were quarantined because they were violent," Vex said slowly. "You want to bring violence back to fight the swarm?" "I want to bring warriors back," Shiva corrected. "The Coalition has forgotten how to fight. The humans never did. It is a terrible risk, but we are already facing extinction. What do we have to lose?" They stole a fast scout ship and set course for the Sol system. The journey took 2 weeks, and with every day that passed, they received news of another system falling to the Krithax. The swarm was accelerating, growing stronger with each world it consumed. When they finally reached the quarantine barrier, Shiva expected to find a simple fence of energy, maybe automated defenses. Instead, she found something that made her crystalline form flash with shock. The barrier was still there, but beyond it was not a single primitive planet. The entire Sol system was filled with structures. Massive space stations orbited every planet. Ships moved in organized patterns between worlds. What looked like mining operations harvested asteroids. And around the third planet, Earth, there was a ring of habitats that glowed with the light of billions of lives. "By the old stars," Mala whispered. They built an empire. The humans had not destroyed themselves. They had not stagnated. They had taken their prison and turned it into a thriving civilization. The evidence of their industry filled the entire star system. "They can see us," Mindel 7 warned, his consciousness detecting active scans. "Multiple ships are moving to intercept." 3 human vessels appeared, sleek and powerful, surrounding the scout ship. A communication channel opened, and a human face appeared on the screen. It was a woman with dark skin and hard eyes, wearing a uniform that Shiva recognized from the old files as military clothing. "This is Captain Rodriguez of the Sol Confederacy Defense Fleet," the woman said in Coalition Standard, her accent strange but understandable. "You have entered quarantine space. State your purpose or be destroyed." Shiva stepped forward, letting her colors shift to show peaceful intent. "Captain Rodriguez, I am Ambassador Shiva of the Vithari. I come with a desperate request. The Galactic Coalition is dying and we need your help." The captain's expression did not change. "The Galactic Coalition locked us in this system and told us we were too dangerous to exist among civilized species. Now you want our help?" "Yes," Shiva said simply. "I know we have no right to ask. But billions are dying. An enemy called the Krathak Swarm is consuming entire worlds, and we have no way to stop them. We need warriors, and we were told that humans were the fiercest fighters in the galaxy. Something flickered in Captain Rodriguez's eyes. Not anger, but something else. Something that made Shiva's form shimmer with uncertain hope. "Follow us," the captain said. "The Council of Sol will decide your fate." The human ships guided them deeper into the system, past incredible constructions that showed 3 centuries of focused development. Shiva saw cities floating in space, farms growing food in massive rotating cylinders, ships being built in orbital factories. Humanity had not just survived their imprisonment. They had thrived. The scout ship docked at a station orbiting Earth, and Shiva and her team were escorted through corridors filled with humans. They were everywhere, working, talking, living their lives, and they looked at the coalition delegates with expressions that mixed curiosity with old bitterness. The Council of Sol met them in a chamber that reminded Shiva of the Coalition Council, but simpler, more functional. 12 humans sat in a semicircle, representing the governments of Earth and the colonies that filled their system. An older man with gray hair and gentle eyes sat at the center. "I am Secretary General Chen," he said. "We have monitored your approach and heard your initial request. Before we discuss anything else, I want you to understand something. We are not the species you locked away 300 years ago." Shiva's colors shifted with confusion. "You have changed?" "We had to," Chen replied. "You imprisoned us for our capacity for violence, so we made a choice. We eliminated warfare within our system. We dismantled our weapons of mass destruction. We banned armies and built a civilization based on cooperation instead of conflict. We became the peaceful species you wanted us to be." Shiva felt hope dying in her crystalline heart. They had come so far, taken such a risk, and the humans were no longer warriors. "However," Chen continued, and his smile was sad, "we are still human. We still have our instincts, our drive, our refusal to back down from danger. We just channeled it differently." "I do not understand," Shiva admitted. One of the other council members stood. She was younger, with scars on her face and hands that spoke of a hard life. "I am Chief Coordinator Okonkwo of the Emergency Response Services. Secretary Chen is correct that we have no military, but we have something else. We have millions of people trained to run toward danger instead of away from it. Firefighters who charge into burning buildings, medics who work in disaster zones, rescue workers who dive into collapsing structures, search and rescue teams who never give up looking for survivors." Shiva's form flickered with uncertainty. "You are offering us rescuers? We need fighters. You need people who do not break," Okonkwo said firmly. "People who will face impossible odds to save lives. People who consider no sacrifice too great if it means someone else survives. You called us the fiercest fighters in the galaxy. You were wrong. We are the fiercest protectors, and if your people are dying, then that is exactly what you need." The Secretary General stood and looked at Shiva with those gentle eyes that somehow held infinite strength. "We will help you, Ambassador. Not because we have forgiven the Coalition for imprisoning us, but because people are dying and we are human. We cannot hear a cry for help and do nothing." Shiva felt something she had not felt in months. Hope. Maybe it was not the kind of help she had expected, but something in the way these humans spoke, the absolute certainty in their voices, made her believe that maybe, just maybe, they could make a difference. "How many can you send?" she asked. Chief Coordinator Okonkwo smiled, and it was the smile of someone who had walked through fire and come out stronger. "How many do you need?" 3 ships left the Sol system 2 days later, and Shiva watched them depart with a mixture of hope and confusion. She had expected warships, vessels bristling with weapons and carrying soldiers ready for battle. Instead, the humans had sent 3 massive transport vessels painted white with red crosses, symbols that Chief Coordinator Okonkwo had explained meant medical aid and rescue services. Each ship carried 5,000 humans, not soldiers but volunteers, firefighters from Earth's megacities, medics from the orbital hospitals, engineers who specialized in disaster response, search and rescue coordinators who had spent their lives pulling people from collapsed buildings and burning structures. They brought equipment that seemed useless for war, things like medical supplies, rescue tools, temporary shelter units, and food synthesizers. "I do not understand," Shiva admitted to Okonkwo, who had come aboard the Coalition scout ship to coordinate with them. "The Krathaks are not a natural disaster. They are an enemy that must be fought. Okonkwo was a tall woman with short gray hair and eyes that had seen terrible things. She wore a simple uniform with patches showing years of service in disaster zones. She looked at Shiva with something like pity. Ambassador, every disaster is a fight. Every fire is an enemy. Every collapsed building is a battle. The only difference is what you are fighting for. We fight for lives, always for lives. The journey to Torrens Prime took 3 weeks, and during that time Shiva got to know the humans better. She spent time in the common areas of the transport ships, watching them train and prepare. What she saw both fascinated and disturbed her. The humans practiced running into danger. They would simulate collapsing structures and practice pulling each other out. They would create fake fires and practice moving through smoke and heat. They worked in teams with perfect coordination, each person knowing exactly what the others would do. But it was the way they talked about their work that truly unsettled Shiva. They spoke of past disasters with a casualness that seemed wrong. A firefighter named Marcus told stories about being trapped in a burning building for 6 hours, surrounded by flames, slowly running out of air. He laughed while telling it, and his friends joined in, sharing their own horror stories like they were fond memories. "Did you not feel fear?" Shiva asked Marcus one day. The big man looked at her with surprise. "Of course I felt fear. Fear keeps you alert, keeps you alive, but fear does not get to make the decisions. There were people who needed help, so I went in. That is the job." "But you almost died," Shiva pointed out, her colors shifting with confusion. Marcus shrugged. "Almost does not count. I got everyone out. That is what matters." Shiva began to understand something that the Coalition had missed 300 years ago. The humans were not violent because they enjoyed hurting others. They were fierce because they refused to accept loss. That same drive that made them dangerous warriors made them unstoppable rescuers. They simply could not walk away from someone in danger. Mindel 7 spent time with the human medics, his consciousness fascinated by their approach to healing. The Coalition had advanced medicine, but they practiced it in clean, safe hospitals. The human medics trained to work in active war zones in burning buildings in the middle of chaos. They could perform surgery with building collapsing around them and never lose focus on their patient. "They have a saying," Mindel 7 told Shiva. "The golden hour. The first hour after an injury is when treatment matters most. These humans will do anything, risk anything, to reach someone within that golden hour." Lieutenant Vex, the Corthan officer, spent his time with the rescue coordinators. He was trying to understand their tactics, their strategy. What he found confused him deeply. "They have no command structure that makes sense," he complained to Shiva. "Everyone can make decisions. They trust each other completely. And their primary tactic is to just keep trying until they succeed or die. It is not strategy. It is stubbornness." But Shiva was beginning to think that stubbornness might be exactly what they needed. The first signs that something was wrong came when they were still 2 days out from Torrens Prime. The communication channels filled with panicked messages. The Krithax had arrived at the water world ahead of schedule, and the situation was deteriorating faster than anyone had predicted. "The swarm is in low orbit," Captain Mala reported, her water suit sloshing with agitation. "They are dropping parasites directly onto the planet. The infection rate is exponential. We are estimating that half the planet will be consumed within 48 hours. The Coalition defense fleet was in full retreat, unable to stop the swarm's advance. Millions of Torrens were trapped on the surface, unable to evacuate quickly enough. The underwater cities were being invaded by Krithax parasites that could survive in water, adapt to any environment, and turn their victims into more swarm drones. "We need to turn back," Vex said firmly. "This is a lost cause. We cannot save them." But Okonkwo was already moving, her fingers flying across communication panels contacting the other human ships. "All units, prepare for emergency deployment. We are going in hot." "You cannot be serious," Vex protested. "The Krithax are already on the planet. If you land, you will be consumed." Okonkwo looked at him with those hard eyes. "People are trapped down there. We are going to get them out." The 3 human ships dropped out of faster-than-light travel right into the chaos above Torrens Prime. The sight that greeted them was a nightmare. The beautiful blue water world was turning dark, covered in spreading patches of black corruption where the Krithax had taken hold. Coalition ships fled in panic while swarm vessels, organic things that looked like diseased metal, descended toward the surface. The human ships did not run. They dove straight toward the planet. "This is insane," Vex muttered, watching from the scout ship that followed at a safe distance. They are going to die. But Shiva was seeing something else. The human ships were not attacking the swarm. They were ignoring it completely, focused entirely on the planet below. Their shields were configured for atmospheric entry, not combat. They were not here to fight. They were here to save. The transport ships hit the atmosphere and split apart. They were modular, designed to break into dozens of smaller rescue shuttles. Within minutes, hundreds of small craft were spreading across the planet, heading for the Tauran cities that were calling for help. Shiva watched the tactical display in horror and awe. The human shuttles were landing in active combat zones, places where the Krithax parasites were already spreading through the population. The coalition forces had declared those areas lost, writing off millions of lives as unsavable, but the humans were going in anyway. Ground Team 1, this is Commander Sarah Chen, a voice crackled over the communications. We have visual on the northern habitat cluster. Estimating 50,000 civilians trapped by swarm advance. Beginning evacuation procedures. Shiva pulled up the video feed from Chen's helmet camera. What she saw made her crystalline form flash with terror. The Tauran's habitat was a beautiful underwater dome city, but it was being invaded by Krithax parasites that crawled through the water like diseased fish. The parasites were attaching to Tauran civilians, beginning the infection process that would turn them into swarm drones. Chen and her team of 20 humans were running through the streets of the underwater city, wearing specialized suits that allowed them to move through water. They were not running away from the parasites. They were running toward them. Team priority is civilian extraction, Chen commanded. Ignore the bugs unless they are directly threatening a rescue. We move fast, we move smart, and we do not leave anyone behind. Shiva watched as the humans began pulling Tauran civilians away from the parasites. They worked with incredible speed, grabbing people and rushing them toward the evacuation shuttles. When parasites attacked, the humans fought them off with simple tools. Electrified prods and cutting implements, nothing fancy, just enough to keep the creatures away from the civilians. A young Tauran's child, no more than 4 years old in their species terms, was cornered by 3 parasites. The child was crying, their water suit damaged and leaking. A human firefighter named Marcus, the same man Shiva had spoken with earlier, did not hesitate. He threw himself between the child and the parasites. 2 of the parasites attached to Marcus's suit. Shiva could see them trying to burrow through the protective material, trying to reach his flesh. But Marcus ignored them completely. He scooped up the child, checked that their emergency air supply was working, and ran toward the shuttle. The other humans covered him, pulling the parasites off his suit while he kept running. I got you, little one, Marcus said softly to the terrified child. You are safe now, I promise. He made it to the shuttle with the parasite still trying to eat through his suit. Only after he handed the child to the medics did he let his teammates remove the creatures from his body. One had almost made it through. Another few seconds and he would have been infected. You should have dropped the child and saved yourself, Vex said, watching the feed in disbelief. Okonkwo, standing beside him, looked at the Korthan officer with an expression of disappointment. Then he would not be human. Across the planet, the same scene played out hundreds of times. Human rescue teams went into areas that the Coalition had declared death zones. They pulled civilians out of collapsing buildings while Krithax parasites swarmed around them. They swam through infected waters to reach trapped families. They climbed through wreckage while the swarm consumed everything around them. And they died. 15 humans were lost in the first 6 hours. Infected by parasites, crushed by collapsing structures, or simply overwhelmed by the sheer number of Krithax creatures. But even as they died, they kept working. A medic named Jennifer Park was infected during a rescue. She felt the parasite taking over her nervous system. She had maybe 10 minutes before she became a swarm drone. She used those 10 minutes to perform emergency surgery on a Tauran's child, saving the young one's life. Then she walked calmly away from the evacuation zone and into the swarm, making sure she would not endanger anyone when the infection took full control. The Coalition forces watched in stunned silence as the humans worked. They were not soldiers. They had no battle formations, no military tactics. But they had something else. They had absolute refusal to give up. Every time a building collapsed, they dug through the rubble. Every time the swarm advanced, they moved faster. Every time someone said a civilian was unreachable, they found a way to reach them anyway. This is insane, a Coalition captain muttered over the open channel. They are going to lose people for every civilian they save. The cost is too high. Commander Chen's voice cut through the channel hard and cold. Every life has infinite value. There is no cost too high to save someone. That is what it means to be human. 12 hours into the operation, the humans had evacuated 300,000 Tauran civilians from areas the coalition had declared lost. But the swarm was advancing faster than they could evacuate. Entire sections of the planet were now completely consumed, transformed into organic hive structures that produced more Krithax parasites. "We need to pull back," Vex insisted. "This planet is lost. The humans have saved who they can. It is time to retreat." But Okonkwo shook her head. "There are still 2 million Taurans alive on the surface. We do not leave until we get them all." "That is impossible," Vex said flatly. "You do not have enough ships, enough people, enough time." "Then we work faster." And they did. The humans started operating in shifts, working 20 hours on, 4 hours off. They pushed themselves beyond exhaustion, beyond reason. They adapted to the swarm's tactics, learned how the parasites hunted, found ways to distract and delay the Krethax while civilians escaped. A human engineer named David Kim figured out that the parasites were attracted to electrical signals. He rigged up a series of decoy transmitters that mimicked Tauran's brain patterns. The parasites swarmed the decoys while rescue teams extracted civilians from nearby. Kim died setting up his last decoy, but his sacrifice saved 20,000 lives. The coalition forces began to help, inspired by the humans' refusal to quit. Coalition ships started providing cover for the rescue shuttles. Coalition soldiers who had been retreating in panic started going back to help with evacuations. They were not as brave as the humans, not as willing to risk everything, but they tried. They really tried. On the third day, Commander Chen contacted Shiva directly. The human woman looked exhausted, her face covered in soot and her suit damaged in a dozen places. But her eyes were still fierce, still burning with determination. "Ambassador, we have a problem," Chen said. "There is a habitat dome in the southern hemisphere. 500,000 civilians trapped inside. The swarm has surrounded it completely. We cannot get shuttles through without losing them all." "Then those civilians are lost," Shiva said sadly, her colors shifting to gray. "You have done everything possible. You have saved millions. You cannot save everyone." Chen looked at her with an expression that Shiva would remember for the rest of her life. It was not anger or frustration. It was simple, absolute refusal. "Watch us," Chen said. The humans did something that no rational being would consider. They landed their 3 main transport ships, the massive vessels that were not designed for atmospheric operations, directly between the swarm and the trapped habitat. They used the ships themselves as shields, as barriers between the civilians and death. The Krethax attacked the ships with everything they had. The organic vessels of the swarm crashed into the transports. Parasites swarmed across their hulls. The humans inside worked desperately to keep the shields active, while rescue shuttles evacuated the habitat behind them. 2 of the transport ships fell. Their shields collapsed under the assault, and the swarm consumed them. Hundreds of humans died, but they bought enough time. The 500,000 Tauran civilians escaped. When it was over, when the last shuttle had left the surface, Shiva counted the cost. The humans had come with 15,000 volunteers. 3,000 had died, an enormous casualty rate that would have broken any military force. But they had saved 2.8 million Taurans' lives, lives that the coalition had considered already lost. The surviving humans gathered on their remaining ship, exhausted and wounded. Shiva went to thank them, to tell them they had done more than anyone had asked or expected. She found them in the main hangar, sitting among their equipment, too tired to move. Commander Chen looked up at Shiva with eyes that held 1,000 years of sorrow and strength. "How many did we lose?" 2,800,000 saved, Shiva replied. 3,000 human lives lost. Chen nodded slowly. "Then we did our job." "Your job?" Shiva's colors flashed with confusion. "You are calling this success? 3,000 of your people died, and nearly 3 million others lived because of them," Chen replied. "That is the job, Ambassador. That is what we do. We trade our lives so others can keep theirs. We run into the fire so others can run out. We do not win by killing our enemies. We win by refusing to let our enemies kill those we protect." Shiva finally understood what the humans were offering. Not violence, but something far more powerful. The absolute determination to protect life no matter the cost. "The Krethax are still coming," Shiva said quietly. They are still spreading. This was just one planet. Chen stood up, swaying slightly from exhaustion, but her voice was strong. Then we better get back to work. How many more planets need help? And Shiva knew that humanity had given them something more valuable than weapons or warriors. They had given them hope. The hope that came from seeing people who simply refused to accept that anyone was beyond saving. The news from Torrens Prime spread across the galaxy like wildfire. Ambassador Shiva had transmitted the full record of the human rescue operations, holding nothing back. The coalition needed to see what humanity had done, needed to understand what these quarantined beings were capable of. The response was immediate and overwhelming. Millions of humans volunteered to help. They came from every corner of the Sol system, from Earth and Mars and the orbital habitats and the mining colonies in the asteroid belt. They were not soldiers answering a call to war. They were ordinary people who heard that someone needed help and could not ignore it. Within 2 weeks, humanity had deployed 50 transport ships carrying 250,000 volunteers. They spread across coalition space, heading for worlds threatened by the Krethax swarm. And everywhere they went, they brought the same fierce determination to save lives. On Crystalline Prime, the homeworld of Shiva's people, the Vithari watched in amazement as human rescue teams worked for 72 hours straight to evacuate a city of 2 million before the swarm arrived. The humans did not stop to rest, did not stop to eat. They just kept working, kept moving, kept saving people until the job was done. On Mindel Station, a massive space habitat that housed 5 million of the telepathic species, human engineers worked alongside Mindel technicians to reinforce the station's defenses. When the Krethax attacked, the humans stayed behind to hold the evacuation routes open while the Mindel escaped. 400 humans died, but 5 million Mindel lived. And on Astral 7, the military headquarters of the Coalition Defense Forces, human tactical advisors began teaching Coalition soldiers something they had forgotten: how to think about combat not as destruction, but as protection, how to hold ground not to kill enemies but to shield civilians, how to accept casualties not as failures but as the price of saving others. But the swarm kept coming. For every world the humans saved, 2 more fell. The Krethax were adapting, learning from each encounter. They began targeting evacuation routes specifically, cutting off escape paths before the humans could arrive. They started evolving parasites that could infiltrate rescue equipment, turning the humans' own tools against them, and they were getting faster. The projections had said 5 years before the coalition fell. Now the estimates were down to 18 months. The swarm was growing exponentially, consuming resources and populations and turning them into more Krethax drones. Every victory the humans achieved was temporary. Every life saved was just delaying the inevitable. Secretary General Chen called an emergency meeting on Earth. Representatives from across the coalition attended, including Shiva, who had become humanity's primary contact with the galactic government. The old man looked tired, older than his years, but his eyes still held that gentle strength. "We cannot win this way," he said simply. "We are saving millions, but billions are still dying. The swarm is too large, spreading too fast. We need to change our approach." "What are you suggesting?" asked High Chancellor Vrakon, who had traveled to Sol System personally. "Humanity has performed miracles. You have saved more lives than we thought possible. But you are correct. We cannot evacuate the entire coalition. We need to stop the Krethax, not just run from them." Chen nodded slowly. "We have been studying the swarm through every rescue operation. Our people have been collecting samples, recording behavior patterns, analyzing every aspect of the Krethax biology. We have learned things, important things." A human scientist named Dr. Lisa Park stepped forward. She was young, probably in her early 30s, but she had the confident manner of someone who understood her subject completely. She activated a holographic display that showed the structure of a Krethax parasite. "The swarm is not what we thought," Dr. Park explained. "They are not mindless destroyers. They are a collective intelligence, yes, but one driven by a very specific need: starvation." The coalition representatives stirred with confusion. Mindel 7's telepathic voice echoed in everyone's minds. "Starvation? But they consume entire worlds. How can they be starving?" "Because they are refugees," Dr. Park replied. "Our analysis of their genetic structure shows they originated from a galaxy cluster beyond the galactic rim. Based on the decay patterns in their DNA, we estimate they have been traveling for over 10,000 years. Their original home was destroyed, and they have been fleeing ever since, consuming whatever they find to fuel their journey. Shiva's crystalline form flashed with shocked colors. They are running from something? Or looking for something, Dr. Park said. A new home, perhaps. Resources to rebuild their civilization? We do not know exactly. But what we do know is that the Krithaks are not attacking the Coalition out of malice. They are consuming worlds because they are desperate. They are dying, and they will do anything to survive. Lieutenant Vex stood up, his Korthan form tense with anger. So we should pity them. They have killed billions of our people. They have destroyed hundreds of worlds. And you tell us they are victims? Chen raised a hand for calm. No one is saying the Krithaks are not dangerous. No one is saying we should not defend against them. But understanding why an enemy fights is the first step to ending the fight. What are you proposing? Shiva asked, though she was beginning to suspect the answer. Communication, Chen said. We need to talk to them. Find out what they need. See if there is a way to give them what they want without them having to consume the entire coalition to get it. The reaction was explosive. Coalition representatives began shouting, their various forms of communication creating chaos. The idea of negotiating with the Krithaks, of treating them as anything other than a plague to be destroyed, was unthinkable to most of them. But Okonkwo stepped forward, her voice cutting through the noise. We have tried running. We have tried fighting. Neither has worked. The only option we have not tried is understanding. And if there is even a chance that understanding can save lives, then we have to try. How? Demanded High Chancellor Vrakon. The Krithaks do not communicate. They do not respond to any attempts at contact. How can we talk to something that only knows how to consume? Dr. Park looked uncomfortable. There is a way. A dangerous way. The Krithaks are a hive mind. They share thoughts through a biological network created by their parasites. If we could connect someone to that network, they could potentially communicate with the collective intelligence that controls the swarm. You mean infect someone? Vex said flatly. Let a parasite take over their mind. Not take over, Dr. Park corrected. We have been developing a modified parasite, one that can connect to the network without fully converting the host. The connection would be temporary, maybe an hour at most before the host's immune system rejected it. But in that hour, we could potentially communicate directly with the Krithak's consciousness. It would be incredibly dangerous, Chen added. The person who volunteers would be connected to a hostile alien mind. They could be overwhelmed, consumed, turned into a swarm drone. We estimate the survival chance at less than 30%. Silence fell over the meeting. Everyone understood what was being proposed. Someone would have to volunteer to be infected by the very enemy that had killed billions. Someone would have to risk their mind, their life, their very identity for the chance to talk to the swarm. I will do it, Shiva said. Chen looked at her with sad eyes. Ambassador, you have already done so much. You brought us into this fight. You do not need to sacrifice yourself as well. You humans talk about running toward danger, Shiva replied, her colors shifting to determined gold. You have shown us that the only way to save others is to risk yourself. How can I ask you to keep making that sacrifice if I am not willing to do the same? But Chen shook his head. No. If anyone does this, it should be a human. We understand sacrifice. We have practice at walking into impossible situations. And if something goes wrong, if the person becomes a threat, our people will do what is necessary to stop them. I volunteer, said a voice from the back of the room. Everyone turned to see a middle-aged human man stepping forward. He had gray in his hair and scars on his face, and he wore the uniform of a rescue coordinator. Shiva recognized him as James Chen, the Secretary General's son. Absolutely not, the Secretary General said firmly. James, I cannot allow you to do this. You cannot stop me, Father, James replied calmly. I am a volunteer, same as everyone else who has come to help the coalition. And I have the necessary qualifications. I am a trained negotiator. I have 20 years of experience in crisis communication, and I am willing to take the risk. The argument went on for hours, but in the end, James Chen got his way. He was not the Secretary General's son in this moment. He was just another human volunteer, ready to run toward danger if it meant saving lives. The preparation took 3 days. Dr. Park and her team worked to prepare the modified parasite, calibrating it carefully to create a connection without allowing full conversion. James Chen went through medical procedures to strengthen his body's defenses, to give him the best chance of survival. And the coalition prepared for what might happen if the attempt failed. The experiment took place on a secure research station, isolated from any population centers. If James became fully infected, if he turned into a Krethax drone, the station would be destroyed to prevent the infection from spreading. Shiva watched from the observation deck as James entered the containment chamber. He looked calm, almost peaceful, like someone about to do a job he had trained for his entire life. "Are you ready?" Dr. Park asked over the intercom. "As ready as I will ever be," James replied. "Let us see if we can talk to these things." The parasite was released into the chamber. It was a small creature, barely the size of a human hand, but it moved with terrible purpose. It crawled up James's leg and attached to his neck near the base of his skull. Its tendrils pierced his skin and began working their way toward his nervous system. James gasped, his body going rigid. His eyes went wide and then distant, seeing something beyond the physical world. The monitors showed his brain activity spiking as the parasite made contact with his neural pathways. "James, can you hear me?" Dr. Park asked urgently. For a long moment, there was no response. Then James's mouth opened and he spoke, but his voice was strange, layered, like multiple beings talking at once. "We are Krethax. We are multitude. We are hunger. We are survival." Everyone in the observation room went still. It was working. They were talking to the swarm. "Why do you attack us?" James asked, his own voice mixing with the Krethax sounds. "Why do you consume our worlds? We must feed. We must grow. We must survive." The old galaxy died. The stars went dark. We fled, we traveled, we searched. But there is no food in the void. Only here, only in your space. We found life again. We must take it. We must consume it. Or we die. "There must be another way," James said. "We can help you. We can find you resources that do not require killing billions of innocent beings. You are food. You are resources. There is no difference. We take what we need. That is survival. That is law of existence." James was struggling now, fighting to maintain his own consciousness while connected to the vast alien mind. Shiva could see sweat pouring down his face, could see his hands shaking, but he kept talking. "What if we gave you a place to live? A star system with resources but no intelligent life? What if we helped you adapt? To change from parasites into something that can exist without consuming others? You would do this? You would help us? We have killed your people. We have destroyed your worlds. Why would you help us?" And James Chen, speaking with a human voice full of that infinite strength that Shiva had come to recognize, said the words that would change everything. "Because that is what we do. We save lives. All lives, even those that have tried to destroy us. Even those that do not think they deserve saving. We do not give up on anyone ever." The Krethax consciousness went silent. James collapsed, the parasite detaching from his neck and falling lifeless to the floor. Medical teams rushed in, checking his vital signs, making sure he was still alive, still himself. He was barely conscious, but he managed to look up at his father through the observation window. "I think they are considering it," he whispered before passing out. The Secretary General stood with tears in his eyes, watching as his son was carried to the medical bay. Shiva approached him quietly, her colors gentle with sympathy. "Your son is incredibly brave," she said. "All humans are brave when someone needs help," Chen replied. "That is our curse and our gift." 3 days later, as James Chen recovered from his ordeal, the Krethax swarm did something unprecedented. They stopped advancing. Across the entire galaxy, the swarm halted its attacks and went still, not retreating but not advancing either, waiting. And then a message came through, not in words but in actions. A Krethax ship approached a coalition outpost alone, without attacking. It released a single parasite that had been modified to carry a simple message in its genetic code. "We wish to talk more. Send the one called James Chen. Send those who would help us survive without consuming. We will listen. We will try. We will see if there is another way." Hope, real hope, filled the coalition for the first time in months. The humans had done the impossible again. They had not defeated the enemy. They had not destroyed the threat. They had done something much harder. They had reached out to beings that everyone thought were monsters, and found the scared, desperate survivors underneath. Shiva looked at Secretary General Chen and saw the exhaustion in his eyes, but also the determination. These humans had come to the galaxy as prisoners, locked away for being too dangerous. Now they were teaching the galaxy what true strength meant. "What happens now?" she asked. Chen smiled that gentle smile. "Now comes the hard part. Now we have to keep our promise. We have to figure out how to save the Krithaks without letting them destroy anyone else. We have to find a way for everyone to survive." "Is that even possible?" "I do not know," Chen admitted. "But we are human. Impossible is just a starting point for us." James Chen stood on the observation deck of the diplomatic vessel, watching as the Krithak ship approached. It was a massive thing, organic and wrong-looking like a tumor grown in the shape of a spacecraft. But it moved carefully, slowly, showing none of the aggressive behavior that had characterized every previous swarm encounter. He was still weak from his connection to the hive mind 3 weeks ago. The parasite had done damage to his nervous system that the doctors said might never fully heal. He had tremors in his hands now, headaches that came without warning, and sometimes he heard whispers in his mind that might have been echoes of the Krithak's consciousness or might have been his brain trying to cope with trauma. But he was the only human who had successfully communicated with the swarm, which made him the natural choice to lead the next attempt at contact. His father had argued against it, of course. But James had made his choice. He would see this through to the end, whatever that end might be. "Are you certain you want to do this?" Ambassador Shiva asked, her crystalline form flickering with concern. She had become a close friend over the past months, one of the few beings who truly understood what the humans were trying to accomplish. "No," James admitted honestly, "but being certain has never been a requirement for doing what is right." The Krithak ship docked with the diplomatic vessel, and 3 figures emerged. They were humanoid in shape, but clearly not fully organic anymore. They had been Taurans once, their water-adapted bodies still recognizable beneath the black corruption of Krithak's conversion. But they moved deliberately, showing none of the mindless aggression of typical swarm drones. James felt his stomach turn. These were victims, beings who had been consumed by the parasites and transformed into something else. But they were also ambassadors the first time the Krithaks had sent, representatives who could communicate in real time rather than through slow genetic messages. The lead figure stepped forward and spoke with a voice that layered multiple sounds on top of each other, creating harmonies that should not have been possible from a single throat. "I am Vessel of Understanding. I was Torrens named Kayla before joining the collective. I speak for the Krithaks. I speak for the multitude. I speak for survival." James forced himself to stay calm, to not show the horror he felt at seeing what the swarm did to its victims. "I am James Chen. I speak for humanity. Thank you for coming to talk. You offered help. You offered survival without consumption. The collective does not understand, but the collective is desperate. We will listen. We will try. We will see if your words have meaning or if they are just sounds prey makes before being eaten." It was not the most promising start to negotiations, but it was a start. Over the next several hours, James and his team explained humanity's proposal. They had been working on it nonstop since his first contact with the swarm, bringing in experts from every field to develop a solution that might actually work. The plan was audacious and would require resources the coalition had never committed to any single project. But it was the only alternative to extinction that anyone had been able to devise. "We have identified a cluster of solar systems in unclaimed space, near the galactic rim," James explained, showing holographic maps. 16 stars with dozens of planets rich in resources but completely lifeless. No intelligent species, no presentient life, just raw materials. "We propose giving this cluster to the Krithaks as a permanent home." Vessel of Understanding tilted its head in a gesture that was half Tauren's curiosity and half swarm analysis. "Why would you give us anything? We have killed your people. We have consumed your worlds." "Because you were starving," James replied. "Because you were desperate. Because we understand that desperate beings do terrible things to survive, and because we believe that if you had a home, a place where you could exist without consuming others, you would choose that over war. The collective is large, trillions of drones, billions of parasites. The cluster you show would not sustain us for long. We would consume those worlds and still be hungry." This was the critical part, the piece of the plan that had required the most work and would require the most faith. Dr. Park stepped forward, her calm scientific voice a counterpoint to the tension in the room. "We know the Krethak's biology transforms whatever it consumes," she said. "You are incredibly adaptable, able to survive in any environment by changing yourselves to match it. What if we helped you adapt in a different direction? What if we helped you become something that does not need to consume living beings at all?" "Explain," Vessel of Understanding demanded. "Your parasites work by integrating with host biology and rewriting it to serve the collective. But that same mechanism could potentially be used to transform the Krethaks themselves. We have developed a modified parasite, one that carries genetic information designed to change the swarm, from parasitic to symbiotic." Dr. Park displayed complex biological diagrams. "If the Krethaks accept this modified parasite, it will spread through your collective, gradually changing your biology. You would still be a hive mind, still be the Krethaks, but you would gain the ability to process non-living matter for energy. You could feed on minerals, on stellar radiation, on the raw resources of dead worlds instead of needing to consume living beings." The three Krethaks ambassadors stood completely still, and James knew they were communicating with the greater collective, sharing this information with the vast intelligence that controlled the swarm. Minutes passed in tense silence. Finally, Vessel of Understanding spoke again. "This modification, it could change what we are. It could destroy the collective. Why should we trust you?" "Because we are giving you a choice that no one gave you before," James said. "The galaxy tried to destroy you. We are trying to save you. Even after everything the Krethaks have done, we still think you are worth saving. You are prey. We are predators. This is the natural order." "No," James said firmly. "You are refugees who became predators because you had no other choice. But now you have a choice. You can keep consuming worlds until the galaxy unites and destroys you completely, or you can accept our help and become something new, something that can exist without killing." Vessel of Understanding stared at him with eyes that held both Tauren's intelligence and swarm coldness. "You would risk everything on the hope that we can change? You would give us a home, help us transform, trust that we will not betray you?" "Yes," James replied simply. "Why?" And James thought about all the humans who had died on Tauren's Prime, who had sacrificed themselves on a dozen worlds to save Coalition civilians. He thought about the firefighters who ran into burning buildings, the medics who worked in war zones, the rescue workers who never gave up searching for survivors. He thought about what it meant to be human, because that is what we do. We save people, even when it is dangerous, even when it is stupid, even when everyone says it is impossible. We save people because that is the only thing that matters. And you are people too, even if you do not look like us, even if you have done terrible things. You are people who can be saved." The Krethak's ambassadors left without giving an answer. The waiting was agony. Days turned into weeks with no word from the swarm. Some coalition members argued that the Krethaks were just buying time, preparing for another massive assault. Others believed they were insulted by the human proposal and would reject it with violence. But humanity kept working. They sent ships to the designated star cluster and began preparing it as a home for the Krethaks. They built stations to help monitor the transformation process if the swarm accepted it. They developed contingency plans for if the Krethaks attacked. But they also developed integration plans for if the Krethaks chose peace. Shiva watched the humans work with a mixture of admiration and disbelief. "You are building a home for beings that might destroy you. You are investing enormous resources in a plan that might fail. How do you have such faith?" Chief Coordinator Okonkwo looked at her with those hard eyes that had seen so much death and saved so many lives. "It is not faith, Ambassador. It is stubbornness. We simply refuse to believe that anyone is beyond saving." The answer came exactly 42 days after the first diplomatic meeting. Every Krethak ship in the galaxy suddenly changed course, all of them heading toward the designated cluster. The coalition military went on high alert, convinced this was an attack, but the humans knew better. The swarm was accepting their offer. The transformation process took months and required resources that strained even the coalition's vast wealth. Human scientists worked alongside coalition researchers, and even with transformed Krethak's drones who had enough individual consciousness to assist with the project. Together they refined the modified parasite, tested it, and eventually released it into the swarm. The changes were not immediate. The Krethak's biology was incredibly complex, and Transforming trillions of drones required time. But slowly, gradually, the swarm began to change. The parasites that once only consumed living flesh began developing the ability to process minerals and metals. The collective intelligence that had driven the Krethax to consume started finding satisfaction in other sources of energy. Not every Krethax survived the transformation. Some drones rejected the modified parasite and died. Others transformed incompletely and had to be euthanized. The death toll was in the billions, enough to make Shiva sick with grief when she saw the numbers. But James Chen looked at those same numbers differently. Billions died, he agreed. But trillions survived. Trillions of beings who would have continued consuming worlds until the galaxy destroyed them. We gave them a chance to live differently, and most of them took it. That is not a tragedy. That is a miracle. The process took 2 years. 2 years of careful work, of setbacks and breakthroughs, of moments where it seemed like the entire project would collapse and moments where success seemed within reach. The humans never wavered in their commitment. They had promised to save the Krethax, and they would keep that promise no matter what it cost. During those 2 years, something unexpected happened. The Krethax, as they transformed, began to change in ways beyond just their biology. Drones who had been mindless extensions of the collective started developing individual thoughts again. The hive mind remained, but it became a network of individuals choosing to work together rather than a single consciousness, controlling countless bodies. The victims the Krethax had consumed began to wake up. Taurans who had been turned into drones years ago started remembering who they had been. Vithari who had been absorbed into the collective began to crystallize back into their original forms, now connected to the hive mind but still themselves. Thousands of coalition citizens who had been considered dead returned to life, changed but alive. It was Vessel of Understanding, the transformed Taurans who had been the first Krethax ambassador who explained what was happening. She had requested a meeting with James Chen, and she no longer spoke with the layered voice of the collective. She spoke as Kayla, as the Taurans she had been before being consumed. The Krethax were desperate, she said, her water suit showing a body that was part Taurans and part something new. We consumed others not just for energy but for memory, for knowledge, for experience. We were refugees who had forgotten our own past, so we stole the past of others. But now with the transformation, we do not need to consume to survive, and the collective is choosing to give back what it took. You are releasing the people you consumed? Shiva asked, hardly daring to believe it. Not releasing, Kayla corrected. We cannot undo what was done. Those who were consumed are part of the collective now. But they do not have to be prisoners anymore. They can be individuals who choose to remain connected, or they can be individuals who separate completely. The hive mind is learning to be a democracy instead of a dictatorship. James looked at her with tears in his eyes. Kayla, do you remember being consumed? Do you remember what it was like to lose yourself? I remember, she said quietly. I remember the terror of feeling my thoughts being invaded, my identity being erased. I remember becoming part of something so vast and hungry that my individual existence meant nothing. It was worse than death. Then why stay connected? Why remain part of the collective if it hurt you so much? Kala moved closer to the observation window, looking out at the star cluster that was becoming the Krethax home. Because I also remember what it was like to be the swarm, to feel the desperation of billions of beings facing extinction, to know that survival meant becoming monsters, but that the alternative was death for everyone. The Krethax did terrible things, but they did them because they saw no other choice. She turned back to James with eyes that held both Tauran's compassion and Krethax understanding. You gave us a choice. You showed us that survival does not have to mean consuming others. You saved us from ourselves. How can I not stay connected to beings who are learning to be better, who are trying so hard to transform from parasites into partners? You are a better person than I am, James said softly. I do not know if I could forgive what the Krethax did. It is not about forgiveness, Kayla replied. It is about understanding. You humans taught us that. You showed us that the fiercest strength is not the power to destroy enemies, but the courage to save them. The transformation completed in the spring of 2489, exactly 2 years after James Chen first made contact with the swarm. The Krethax had become something new, a collective of individuals who could survive on mineral resources and stellar energy. They no longer needed to consume living beings, though they chose to remain connected as a hive mind because that connection gave them strength and purpose. The Coalition held a ceremony to mark the occasion, a formal recognition of the Krithax as a member species rather than an existential threat. Representatives from every Coalition world attended, and at the center of it all stood humanity, the species that had been locked away for being too dangerous and had proven to be the galaxy's salvation. High Chancellor Vrakon spoke to the assembled delegates, his ancient voice carrying across the vast chamber. 3 years ago we faced extinction. The Krithax swarm was consuming our civilization, and we had no way to stop them. In desperation, we turned to a species we had feared and imprisoned, expecting them to be warriors who would fight our battles for us. He looked directly at Secretary General Chen, at James, who still bore the scars of his connection to the swarm, at Okonkwo, who had led so many impossible rescues. But humanity did not save us by being warriors. They saved us by being human. They ran toward danger when everyone else ran away. They refused to give up when everyone else accepted defeat. And most incredibly, they chose to save their enemies when everyone else wanted those enemies destroyed. The Chancellor turned to address the entire assembly. We called upon humanity's fiercest, expecting weapons and violence. What we received was something far more powerful. We received people who believe that every life has value, that no one is beyond saving, that the only acceptable response to suffering is to help. He paused, letting his words sink in. Today we do not just welcome the Krithax into the Coalition, we also officially end the quarantine of humanity and apologize for the 300 years we imprisoned them. They were never too dangerous for our civilization. We were too afraid to learn from them. The ceremony continued with speeches from various Coalition members, from Krithax representatives who thanked humanity for giving them a future, from victims who had been returned from the swarm and chose to share their stories. But James Chen stood quietly to the side, uncomfortable with the attention and the praise. Shiva found him on an observation deck after the ceremony, looking out at the stars. Her crystalline form glowed softly in the dim light. "You should be celebrating," she said. "You saved the galaxy." "We saved people," James corrected. "That is all we ever tried to do. Save people. The fact that it happened to save the galaxy too is just a happy accident. You are too modest. What you and your people accomplished was incredible." James shook his head. "There is nothing incredible about doing the right thing. The incredible part is that we had to teach the galaxy that saving people is more important than destroying enemies." "Will you return to Sol now?" Shiva asked. "You have earned your freedom. You could go back to your quarantine and live peacefully." "No," James said firmly. "The galaxy has seen what humans can do. They know who we are now. We have a responsibility to stay, to keep helping wherever we are needed, because that is what we do." Shiva's colors shifted to thoughtful blue. "The Coalition will want to recruit human rescue workers to spread your methods across the galaxy." "Good," James replied. "The universe is full of disasters, full of emergencies, full of people who need help. We cannot save everyone, but we can try. And maybe, if we try hard enough, we can teach the galaxy that trying is what matters most." He looked at his hands, at the tremors that still shook them sometimes, the permanent reminder of his connection to the Krithax. Every species in the galaxy has something to offer. The Vithari have wisdom. The Mindel have telepathy. The Taurans have adaptability. And humans? We have the absolute refusal to accept that anyone is beyond saving. It is a good gift to bring to the galaxy, Shiva said softly. "It is the only gift that matters." 5 years after the transformation of the Krithax, the galaxy had changed in ways no one could have predicted. The Coalition had not just survived, it had grown stronger, rebuilt around principles that humanity had taught them. But the greatest test of those principles was still to come. James Chen was older now, his hair completely gray, his body bearing the accumulated damage of years spent pushing himself beyond human limits. The tremors in his hands had gotten worse, and the headaches from his connection to the swarm came more frequently. But he still worked every day, still led humanity's rescue services across Coalition space, still refused to rest while people needed help. He was in his office on Unity Station, the massive orbital habitat that served as humanity's headquarters in Coalition space, when the alarm came through. His assistant, a young Vithari named Tova, burst through the door, her crystalline form flashing with urgent red. "Commander Chen, we have an emergency, a priority alpha situation. James was on his feet immediately, the old instincts never fading. What is it? Natural disaster? Industrial accident? Neither, Tova said, her colors shifting with confusion and fear. It is the Kruthax. They are calling for help. James felt his stomach drop. The Kruthax had been peaceful for 5 years, focusing on building their civilization in the designated cluster, learning to exist without consuming others. They had become valued members of the coalition, contributing their unique abilities to help with everything from medical research to deep space exploration. What could make them call for help? The situation room filled quickly with human coordinators and coalition representatives. The holographic display showed the Kruthax cluster, and at the edge of it something that made James's blood run cold. A fleet of ships, thousands of them, unlike anything in the coalition database. Who are they? Okonkwo demanded, her voice sharp with command authority. Unknown species, reported a Mindel analyst. They appeared at the edge of Kruthax space 3 hours ago. They have been broadcasting on all frequencies in languages we do not recognize. The universal translator has been trying to decode their messages. What do we know about them? James asked. Very little. Their technology is advanced, possibly more so than coalition standard. Their ships are heavily armed, and they are moving directly toward the Kruthax home systems. The translator finally cracked enough of the alien language to provide a rough translation. The words that appeared on the display made everyone in the room go silent with horror. We are the gatherers. We have tracked the plague swarm to this location. We come to cleanse the corruption. We come to burn the parasites. We come to finish what we started 10,000 years ago. Kayla's voice came through the communication system, and James could hear the fear in it despite her connection to the Kruthax collective. Commander Chen, these beings are the ones we fled from, the ones who destroyed our original galaxy. They have been hunting us for millennia. They will not negotiate. They will not show mercy. They come only to exterminate us. James closed his eyes, feeling the weight of impossible choice settling on his shoulders. The Kruthax had consumed billions of coalition lives. They had destroyed hundreds of worlds. Many species still hated them, still wanted revenge for what the swarm had done, and now someone had come to destroy the Kruthax completely. It would be easy to do nothing, to let these gatherers finish the job, to eliminate the species that had caused so much death and suffering. The coalition could stand aside, claim neutrality, and watch as the Kruthax paid the ultimate price for their crimes. But that was not what humans did. All units, prepare for deployment, James ordered. We are going to defend the Kruthax. The room erupted in protest. Coalition representatives argued that they could not risk war with an unknown species to defend the beings who had nearly destroyed them. Military officers pointed out that they knew nothing about the gatherers' capabilities. Even some humans questioned whether the Kruthax deserved protection after everything they had done. But Okonkwo stood beside James, her voice cutting through the chaos. We made a promise. We told the Kruthax we would help them survive. That promise does not end just because keeping it became dangerous. This is different from rescuing civilians from a disaster, argued a coalition admiral. This is war, real war, against an enemy we know nothing about. We could lose everything. Then we lose everything, James said simply. But we do not abandon people who need help. Not when they are drowning, not when they are burning, and not when they are being hunted by genocidal aliens. That is not who we are. Secretary General Chen, now ancient and frail but still holding his position, contacted his son through private channel. James, are you certain about this? You could be committing humanity to a war we cannot win. I'm not certain about anything, Father, James replied honestly. But I am certain that if we stand aside and let the Kruthax be destroyed, we betray everything we have taught the galaxy. We told them that every life has value. We told them that no one is beyond saving. If we only apply those principles when it is convenient, then they mean nothing. The decision was made. Humanity would defend the Kruthax, and the coalition would have to choose whether to stand with them or watch from the sidelines. The response from across coalition space was overwhelming. Every species that humanity had helped, every world that had been saved by human rescue workers, sent ships and soldiers to help defend the Kruthax. The Taurans came because humans had saved millions of their people. The Vithari came because Shiva asked them to. The Mindel came because they understood the debt they owed. Even species that had no direct interaction with humans came because they had heard the stories, understood what humanity represented, and refused to let those principles die. The gathering fleet was the largest the coalition had assembled in 10,000 years. Hundreds of thousands of ships, millions of soldiers all coming together to defend beings that most of them had good reason to hate. But the gatherers' fleet was larger. Their technology was more advanced, and they had been hunting the Krethax for 10,000 years, perfecting their methods of extermination. James stood on the bridge of the human flagship, watching as the two fleets approached each other. Beside him stood Kala, who had volunteered to be there as a representative of the Krethax collective. "You should not be doing this," she said quietly. "We do not deserve your protection. We killed so many of your people." "You were desperate," James replied. "You did what you thought you had to do to survive. And when we offered you another way, you took it. You changed. That is all that matters. The gatherers will not care that we changed. To them, we are still the plague swarm, the corruption that must be cleansed. They have been hunting us for so long that exterminating us is their entire purpose. Then we will show them that their purpose is wrong." The battle, when it came, was unlike anything the coalition had ever experienced. The gatherers fought with cold precision, their weapons designed specifically to counter Krethax biology. They did not target coalition ships unless those ships got in their way. Their entire focus was on destroying every Krethax presence in the cluster. But the coalition forces, led by human coordinators who had spent years learning how to protect lives, fought with a different strategy. They did not try to destroy the gatherer fleet. Instead, they focused on blocking every attack, on shielding the Krethax worlds, on creating barriers between the hunters and their prey. It was rescue work on the largest possible scale. Every tactic the humans had developed for saving lives in disasters was adapted for combat. They used their ships as shields, sacrificing equipment and resources to protect Krethax civilians. They evacuated entire worlds under fire, never leaving anyone behind. They fought not to kill their enemies but to outlast them, to make the cost of extermination too high to continue. The battle raged for 3 days. Ships burned, people died. Entire stations were destroyed. The casualties were enormous, both coalition and gatherer, but the humans refused to retreat, and the rest of the coalition followed their lead. On the 3rd day, James made a decision that would define everything that followed. He took a shuttle directly to the gatherer flagship, broadcasting a message on all frequencies. "I am Commander James Chen of humanity. I am unarmed. I come to talk. If you are going to kill the Krethax, you will have to kill me first. And if you kill me, you will have to kill all of us. We will not move. We will not surrender. We will stand between you and them for as long as we draw breath." The gatherer flagship pulled him aboard. James found himself standing before beings that looked like living stone, their bodies crystalline and hard, their eyes cold and ancient. Their leader, a massive creature that introduced itself as Prime Judgment of the Corrupt, looked at James with something like curiosity. "You are not Krethax," Prime Judgment said. "Why do you protect the plague swarm?" "Because they are not a plague," James replied. "They were refugees. They were desperate. And when given a choice, they chose to change. They consumed our galaxy. They destroyed billions of our people. They are corruption made flesh, and corruption must be cleansed." "They were starving," James insisted. "And yes, they did terrible things while starving. But we helped them find another way to survive. They do not consume living beings anymore. They have changed. Corruption does not change. It only spreads." James felt the old tremors in his hands, the permanent reminder of his connection to the swarm. He held those shaking hands up so Prime Judgment could see them. "I let a Krethax parasite into my mind so I could talk to them. I risked becoming one of them to understand them. And what I learned is that they are people, just like you, just like me. They made terrible choices because they saw no other options, but they are capable of being better. They are trying to be better. You are a young species," Prime Judgment said. "You do not understand. We have hunted the plague swarm for 10,000 years. We have seen what they do, what they are capable of. They cannot be trusted." "Then do not trust them," James said. "Trust us. We have spent 5 years working with the Krethax. We have helped them transform. We have given them a way to exist without consuming others, and we are willing to take responsibility for them. If they ever return to their old ways, we will stop them ourselves. You would go to war against them if they broke your trust?" James thought about all the humans who had died saving Kruthax lives, about the promise they had made to help the swarm survive. If the Kruthax ever returned to consuming living beings, it would mean we failed them. It would mean we did not give them enough support, enough resources, enough hope. So yes, we would stop them, but it would mean we had failed as much as they had. Prime Judgment was silent for a long moment, consulting with its collective consciousness in a way that reminded James uncomfortably of the Kruthax hive mind. Finally, it spoke again. You claim the plague swarm has changed. Prove it. Allow us to examine their biology, their society, their collective consciousness. Let us verify that the corruption has truly been cleansed, and if we find even one trace of the old parasitic nature, we will resume our cleansing and you will not stop us. It was not the resolution James had hoped for, but it was better than watching billions die. Agreed. But your examination will be conducted under human supervision. We will not allow you to harm any Kruthax individual during the investigation. The examination took months. Gatherer scientists, accompanied by human and coalition observers, studied every aspect of the transformed Kruthax. They analyzed their biology, tested their new metabolic processes, interviewed thousands of individuals who had been part of the swarm. They looked for any sign that the parasitic nature remained, any hint that the Kruthax would return to consuming living beings. What they found surprised everyone, including the gatherers themselves. The Kruthax had not just changed their biology. They had fundamentally transformed their collective consciousness. The hive mind that had once driven them to consume now drove them to create, to build, to cooperate with other species. The transformed Kruthax had developed technology that could help heal wounded minds, using their understanding of consciousness to repair psychological trauma. They had found ways to communicate with species that had been considered incapable of higher thought, expanding the definition of intelligence. They had even begun returning to worlds they had consumed, working to help rebuild what they had destroyed. Kayla, speaking before the Gatherer Examination Committee, explained it best. We were monsters because we knew no other way to be. Humanity showed us that monsters can become people if someone is willing to see the person underneath. They looked at the most terrifying thing in the galaxy and said, "We can save them." And they were right. The gatherers spent a week in deliberation after the examination concluded. James spent that week barely sleeping, knowing that the fate of trillions of Kruthax individuals hung on their decision. If the gatherers decided the transformation was not sufficient, war would resume, and this time it might not stop until one side or the other was completely destroyed. Prime Judgment finally called James back to their flagship. The ancient being looked at him with eyes that had witnessed the destruction of galaxies. We came here to finish the cleansing. We came to destroy the plague swarm that consumed our civilization, but the beings we find here are not the same beings we have been hunting for 10,000 years. James held his breath, afraid to hope. The Kruthax have changed in ways we did not think possible. They have transformed from parasites into symbiotes, from consumers into creators. This is your doing, young species called humanity. You accomplished what we thought impossible. Does that mean you will stop hunting them? James asked. It means we will watch them. We will monitor their development. If they ever return to their old ways, we will resume our purpose. But for now, we acknowledge that they have earned the chance to prove they can be something other than the corruption that destroyed our home. Prime Judgment moved closer to James, and for the first time he saw something like respect in those ancient eyes. You asked why we should trust the Kruthax. The answer is that we do not trust them. We trust you. You humans, who run toward danger instead of away from it, who choose to save even those who do not deserve saving, who believe that every being can change if given the chance. The Gatherer fleet departed, leaving the Kruthax cluster in peace. The relief across coalition space was overwhelming. They had avoided a war that could have destroyed them all, and they had done it not through violence but through showing that change was possible. James Chen returned to Unity Station exhausted beyond words. His body was failing, the accumulated damage from years of pushing himself too hard finally catching up. The doctors told him he had maybe a year left if he stopped working, maybe months if he continued at his current pace. He chose to keep working, because that was what humans did. 10 months later, James Chen died while coordinating a rescue operation on a colony world facing a natural disaster. He collapsed at his post, his worn-out heart finally giving up. His last words, according to those who were with him, were, "Did everyone get out safely?" They had. Everyone had gotten out safely. Because James Chen had been there, had organized the rescue, had made sure no one was left behind. The same way he had lived his entire life. The funeral was attended by representatives from every coalition species, including the gatherers, who sent a delegation specifically to honor the human who had convinced them that redemption was possible. The Krithax Collective sent a message that was read aloud, and there was not a dry eye in the chamber when it finished. James Chen taught us that we could be more than what we were. He looked at beings who had consumed billions and saw people worth saving. He made us believe that our past did not have to define our future. We will honor his memory by continuing to be the people he believed we could become. Shiva, now the Coalition's ambassador to the Krithax, gave the final eulogy. Her crystalline form glowed with colors that represented both grief and gratitude. James Chen once told me that humanity's gift to the galaxy was their absolute refusal to accept that anyone is beyond saving. He was wrong. That is not humanity's gift. That is James Chen's gift, which he gave to all of us. He taught humanity what they were capable of, and then he taught the galaxy to be like humanity. She looked out at the assembled mourners, at the representatives of species that had been saved, transformed, given hope because of what James and his people had done. We called upon humanity's fiercest expecting warriors. What we received were protectors, healers, believers in redemption, and the fiercest among them was this man, who spent his life running toward danger to save others, who gave everything he had so that people he did not even know could have a future. Years later, when children across Coalition space learned history, they learned about the Krithax crisis. They learned about the terrifying swarm that nearly destroyed the galaxy. But mostly they learned about the humans who ran toward the danger when everyone else ran away. They learned about firefighters who charged into impossible situations to save lives. About medics who worked in conditions that should have killed them. About rescue workers who never gave up searching for survivors. And they learned about James Chen, the man who believed so strongly that everyone deserved saving, that he convinced an entire galaxy to believe it too. The phrase, "calling humanity's fiercest," became a saying across Coalition space. It meant that no matter how bad things got, no matter how hopeless the situation seemed, there were people who would come running. People who refused to give up. People who believed that every life mattered, even when logic said otherwise. Okonkwo, who succeeded James as head of the Coalition's emergency response services, kept a photo on her desk. It showed James Chen, young and healthy, standing with the first team of human volunteers before they left for Torrens Prime. They were smiling, excited, ready to run toward danger. Visitors would sometimes ask her about the photo, about those early days when humanity first joined the Coalition, and she would tell them the truth. We did not save the galaxy with weapons or armies. We saved it by refusing to accept that anyone was beyond help. We saved it by running toward the danger instead of away from it. We saved it by being human. Is that what it means to be human? They would ask. And Okonkwo would smile that hard, smile that had seen too much death and saved too many lives. Being human means believing that the person beside you, even if they are your enemy, even if they have hurt you, even if they seem beyond redemption, is still worth saving. Not because they deserve it, but because someone has to care when no one else does. The galaxy had changed because humanity had shown them what was possible when you refused to give up on people. They had faced extinction and survived not through violence, but through an absolute commitment to protecting life. They had been called upon to provide their fiercest, and they had provided exactly that. Not their fiercest warriors, but their fiercest protectors, their fiercest believers in redemption, their fiercest hope that everyone, no matter who they were or what they had done, deserved a chance to be better. And that had made all the difference.